Okay, so we have been going through the first part of the book of Revelation as we are concluding our study in the book. I always was a little bit uncertain about the seven churches because, to be honest, I think there may be deeper, some deeper messages involved in these messages that maybe we haven't quite seen yet. The way there is given a bit of prominence right there at the beginning of the book of Revelation, the way God the way Jesus highlights it, and he says he makes sure to say, send these messages to the seven churches, and the messages are so detailed and pointed. We study and we get general lessons, but I just suspect, I could be wrong, but I suspect there might be deeper implication behind these messages that we maybe don't quite understand yet. But that being said, I want to just explain a little further something about the seven churches that maybe we didn't highlight before, but I want to bring out this evening, which is that if you notice, in most of these messages, not all of them, but in most of them, it seems to be talking about two sets of people, right? For example, we already looked at where we saw where Jesus says, you have the Nicolaitans among you. Have among you the Nicolaitans. He said that to two of the churches. And to some of them, he talks about the good, and then he talks about some negative influences among them. So, what it brings is that the way he's seeing the church, there are actually at least two different groups that seem to exist within each church. You have some, and it's going to come out very clearly as we look at the church of Thyatira this evening. There are some who are commended by the Lord. And within the same time period, within the same church, there are some who are chastised by the Lord. And they have a very strong negative message. And how to understand this? I believe the best way we can understand it is to understand the biblical concept of the church. And that's why I wanted to say that first before we even got the message this evening. The biblical concept of the church. Like most of us, I had a wrong concept of the church for most of my life. I mean, I believed that the Church of God was a denomination. And of course, for the first part of my life, for most of my early years, I thought that Church of God was a Seventh-day Adventist church. And for me, every other manifestation of the church was false. I believe Sunday worshippers were all automatically lost. I would not acknowledge that any other Christian group could be acknowledged as the Church of God. For me, Seventh-day Adventism was the Church of God. Of course, after a while I came to understand that there was the idea that there were Christians from other groups who would also be saved, who could also be saved. But back in those days, I never gave it serious thought to ask myself, how could they be outside of the church? Because in truth, the Church of God represents the body of Christ. It represents the people of God. How can anybody be saved outside of that church? So I noticed that later on I came to understand that Roman Catholics have the same, or the Roman Catholic Church has the same concept. They believe that they are exclusively the only church of God, and that you cannot be saved outside of that church. And of course, you go and find out that, listen, this is not so strange. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe the same thing. And Pentecostals kind of believe the same thing because they say, if you don't speak in tongues, you cannot be saved. So you have this very strong idea, which seems to be deeply rooted in some denominations, that there is no salvation outside of their congregation, and that they make up the church of God exclusively. Of course, one thing I will tell you is that when people believe this, they don't understand Christ and they don't know Christ. And most of the time, or all the time, I will say, they don't understand what it means that we are saved in Christ Jesus. Most of the time when you hear churches saying this, it's because they have made their particular doctrine the means of salvation. You know, like the Pentecostals say that if you don't speak in tongues, you can't be saved. Or it's a sign of salvation that you speak in tongues, right? So what they're actually doing, they've made their pet doctrine the door to salvation. Like Roman Catholics believe that Peter holds the key, the Pope holds the key to heaven and hell. And you have to come through the Catholic Church because Jesus says, upon this rock I will build my church. And they believe that that rock was Peter and the church, the Catholic Church. And of course, Adventists are not as, well, it depends on who you talk to. But there are still many Adventists who believe that if you don't keep the Sabbath, you can't be saved. But as we become more developed in our understanding of salvation, we all came to see that this is really a foolish way to look at the church. What we can understand is that the church is made up of those who embrace the name of Christ. This is what the Bible teaches. The church is made up of those who embrace the name of Christ. So you might ask the question, what about those who claim to be Christians, but they are not really Christians? Do they make up a part of the church? So here's what I will say. I know I'm talking a lot and we have to go to the Bible. I know it's much better when we are actually reading the Bible and commenting, but I want to make this point because I'm going to emphasize it a little bit as we are going through the message to Thyatira. So here is my understanding of the church. From what I read in the Bible, I believe that the church, you have two aspects of the church, or two concepts of the church, which God recognizes. First of all, there's what we call the visible church, and then there's what is referred to as the invisible church. Now, the visible church is what men are able to see, and the invisible church is what only God can see. I think that should be easy enough to understand. The visible church is what the men can see, and the invisible church is what God alone can see. So we talk about the visible church. What we are speaking about is people who go by the name of Christ. You and I don't know who is a true Christian and who is not. Okay, in this room, for example, we have at the moment, according to the number I see there, I think we have 48 people. In my vision, in my view, these 48 people are Christians. But that's what I can see, okay? I can see now if I actually look at the people who are showing their videos. I see Brother Juan Carlos, I see Brother Tony, Sister Deborah, I see Brother Kevin, and I see Brother Matt. I believe you, brethren, to be Christians. But I don't know. I don't know. The only person who knows is God. So in God's view, God who sees the heart and God who understands true faith, it may be that what I am seeing is not what God is seeing. So God knows the invisible church, and God may say, well, two of these people are truly a part of the church. They are truly a part of the body of Christ. While four of them claim to be a part of the body of Christ. So you have the visible and you have the invisible. You know, so I believe this is true of all Christians. I believe that everybody who is called a Christian, whether you are Pentecostal or you are Catholic or you are Baptist or you are Adventist, I believe that you form a part of what is called the Church of Christ in that broader sense. But within that Church of Christ, only those who are truly born again belong to that invisible church that God alone can see. That is the true body of Christ. And only those who are born again belong to that body. So what do we make of this visible and invisible church? Well, Jesus said, let the wheat and the tares grow together until the harvest. Now, people apply this to denominations, but remember, when Jesus made this statement, there were no denominations. He was not talking about Baptists or Adventists or Pentecostals. He was talking about Christians, those who bear the name of Christ. He was talking about those who would come to believe in him. All who claim to believe in Christ are automatically a part of the Christian church. But Jesus says, in the time of the harvest, he will say to the angels, he will say to the reapers, gather first the tares in bundles to be burned, and afterwards gather the wheat into my barn. So what he's saying is that the time is coming when within the Christian community there's going to be a great separation. In this separation, first of all, those who claim to be his people but are not really his people, they're going to be separated and they're going to take a certain position. They're going to congregate together, or they're going to be, I think this is going to happen through the mark of the beast crisis. I think the final great separation takes place when the mark of the beast comes. That is the harvest that will separate the wheat from the tares. So those who claim to be Christians, but they are not Christians, when the crisis comes, they will take a position with the world, because that's where their heart has been. They take a position with the world. So even though they bear the name Christian, and even though they will have to persecute and condemn those who don't take a similar position, yet they claim to be Christians, they bear the name of Christian, but the harvest is showing that they're not truly God's people. So there is to be a separation, and then what we will see is the invisible church. This church that only God knows is going to appear, and that invisible will become visible. So at this point, you'll have two groups of people who claim that they are Christians, but the greater number, that greater group will take its position with the world, while the true Christians, they are going to be isolated, separated, persecuted, and they are going to be regarded as criminals and subjects of persecution and even murder. They're going to seek to martyr many of these Christians. So that is how I understand the church. And I believe as we look at the messages to the seven churches, we're kind of seeing something like that. And let's go actually to the message here now, and you will understand a little better why I just wanted to highlight that right at the start. So we have looked at Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, the first three churches, and that leaves four because there are seven. So we're going to continue going through, and today we want to look at the church of Thyatira. Based on what we have discussed already, each of these churches represent a period in the history of the Christian church. So we said Ephesus represented that period from about the time of Pentecost right down to about AD 100. And I want to emphasize that while there are these general dates assigned to each period, remember that these dates are not set in stone. It's like the people who look back at history. They said, well, this basically represents this time period, and so they just put a date on it. But these dates are not specific or exact. It's just that the first, up to about AD 100, was the age of the apostles. The last apostle, John, the last living apostle, he died round about AD 100, round about that time he died. We know that when he wrote the book of Revelation back in AD 95, he was an old man, close to 100 years old. So he died shortly after, pretty much. And so we say the church of Ephesus represented the apostolic period. And then you had the Smyrna period when there was a lot of persecution. And if you look at the four horsemen, the four horses that we studied earlier on in Revelation 6, the second horse is the red horse, when peace was taken from the earth. And it's the same period as Smyrna, the church that suffers persecution. And that would be from about AD 100 to about AD 300, 300 and something. And then after that would come Pergamos, the Pergamos period, when the church is beginning to change its nature. It's becoming more corrupt, represented by the black horse when you look at the four horses. And it says of Pergamos that it was dwelling where Satan's seat is. And last week, what we suggested is that Pergamos represents that period when the Roman Catholic Church was beginning to emerge. It's the period of great compromise, when the church was beginning to adapt itself to existence among the heathen. And what it did in order to morph into, or to fit in order to fit in, what the church did was morph itself. It began to adopt pagan practices and to, quote unquote, to Christianize them. What they did, for example, was that they took things like the feast of Tammuz, the feast of Saturnalia, and they made it into Christmas, a festival to celebrate the birthday of Jesus, who actually was born at a far different time. They took things like Ishtar, a feast which celebrated the death and resurrection of supposed resurrection of Tammuz, and they applied it to the death and resurrection of Jesus. The death and resurrection of the sun, I should say. The end of the winter and the coming of spring, and they applied it to the death and the birth of Jesus. And they took things like the pagan Trinity in that period, and they brought it into Christianity. So this represented the Pergamos period. Now, you know what followed that period was that by the time you come to the next period in about 538, from about 313, we would say the Pergamos period lasted till about 538. In 538, you had the emergence of the Roman Catholic Church, fully bred, fully blown. By this time, the Church of Rome had assumed political power, and it had become one of the powerful political institutions in the world. And for the next over 1,000 years, the Church of Rome became the dominant political power in the world. And we're familiar with the statistics that during that period, I mean, historians suggest that anywhere between 60 to 100 million Christians were martyred through the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. They have this estimate, 60 to 100 million Christians. So this is the period we're looking at when we talk about the Church of Thyatira. It's that period when the so-called Christian church, the visible church, has become a tool in the hand of Satan. It bears the name of Christ, but that's about it. There's hardly anything Christian about this church, except that they bear the name Christian. So, let's start. It says in verse 18, Revelation chapter 2, and unto the angel of the church in Thyatira write. And just in passing, let me mention, they say that the church Thyatira means daughter. Unto the angel of the church in Thyatira write, these things saith the Son of God. It might be instructive that Jesus identifies himself here as the Son of God. Why is it interesting? Because it is during this period that the Council of Nicaea sets the doctrine of the Trinity in stone. And it is at this time that Jesus comes to be recognized not so much as the Son of God, but as God himself. This is the period in which the Trinity is established. And so it's kind of interesting that Jesus begins his introduction by identifying himself as the Son of God. We might say that he is establishing his divinity by saying, I'm the Son of God. True, because the Son of God has to be divine, but he does not say, I am God. He says, I am the Son of God. And he's not only saying that I am a divine person, but in the very statement of saying I'm a divine person, he's making the point, I am not God. I am God's Son. Because it's enough to say, I am God, if you want to make the point that you're a divine person. You say, I'm God, you make that point. But he doesn't say, I'm God. He says, I'm the Son of God. So the sonship is important. And I think in light of what happened during this period, that is interesting. Who hath his eyes like unto a flame of fire? And I can't suggest a certain meaning as to why he focuses on his eyes like a flame of fire. But I would think if you have eyes like fire, one of the things you'll be saying is that your eyes are able to see in an extraordinary way. Fire is a purifying agent. Yes, fire purifies. And fire can always also destroy. If Jesus has his eyes like fire, well, I would think that what it might be saying is that he is the one who purifies, who cleans, who takes what is full of dross and turns it into something beautiful. That may be what is implied here. But as I said, I don't have a clear-cut suggestion to make. And his feet, like Brother Reginald says, it means I can see through you, maybe. And that's a good suggestion. It could be that is what is implied here. And his feet are like fine brass. And again, that is something that I'm not too clear about. I mean, what we know is that the only place I see brass involved in the prophecy is when Nebuchadnezzar had his vision of this image. It says that the legs and the thighs of this image were of brass. And I'm not sure if that has any implication here. I doubt it. I can't see the connection. His feet are like fine brass, and it says that his feet are like unto brass that burns in a furnace. I'm going to leave that because I don't have a suggestion to make as to what is implied here. But I think it means something because Jesus identifies himself and he points out this characteristic. You know, some people will say that it means Jesus was a dark-skinned person, which of course is pure foolishness. But each of these things that he points out is referring to some aspect of his authority, some aspect of his characteristics, and I just don't have a suggestion to make for some of these things. But I'm sure that when we discover, we will find out that there's some strong meaning in it. Anyway, I'll move on to verse 19, on to things that I can be a little more certain about. Jesus says, I know thy works, and as I pointed out, it's interesting because in most of these messages, he starts by saying, I know thy works. Why is this interesting? Well, I used to be a part of a church that every Sabbath morning when you go to church, and every Sabbath afternoon when you go to the young people's service, the AY service, they would ask you, they would have a little checklist, and they would find out how many people studied your lesson today and how many people did this today, and they would check it off. And this report would go to the conference, and it would go to the general conference, and it would eventually come out in the papers of the church. How many people were helped? How many people did? It was a detailed report. And at one point, when I wondered about the purpose of this record, they quoted a verse from Proverbs that says, "A good report maketh the bone fat." But later on, I discovered that they were misquoting that verse. You know, he didn't mean that at all. Anyway, what was interesting to me when I started to study these messages in Revelation was because I kept coming upon this phrase where Jesus says, I know thy works. In other words, you know, there is a perspective that people can see. You end up with a report at the end of the year and you say, this year, Seventh-day Adventists have helped 5 million people. I remember when it's very misleading because I remember when I was a boy and we used to go to young people's meeting, we children would compete to see who could say, when they asked how many persons helped, and some would say two, some would say five, and we children would count. I helped my mother wash the dishes this week. I helped to take out the garbage, and if they say persons helped, we children would count that as well. So you'd come up with a record where you say 5 persons helped or 10 persons helped, and we were including things like this. So you end up with a record that says this church has done so much. It helped so many people. It gave out so many pieces of literature. And so you have a report that goes out that gives a very good impression. But every one of the churches, including Laodicea, Jesus begins by saying, I know thy works. So this means that there is a true concept of what you really are, and Jesus has that concept. So all our statements, they mean nothing in the long run, because these might be human perspectives, or these might be deceptive, but it's Jesus who has a true estimate of what we are. So Jesus says, I know your works, and I know your charity and service and faith. I find this a little bit interesting too, because one of the things that it mentions here, which I don't think is mentioned of any other church, is charity. And the reason why I find that a little bit interesting is because this is one of the things that the Roman Catholic Church emphasizes more than anybody else in the world: charity. As a matter of fact, if you have heard of Mother Teresa, this was the mark of this was what they highlighted about her ministry. Of course, they are very strong on receiving charity as well, but they are also very strong on being charitable. I mean, there's an organization in Jamaica called Food for the Poor, and it is run by Catholics. And they go around and they arrange for little one-room homes to be built for people who are in great need. If you need a little home and you can find a little piece of land, you can make an application, and maybe Food for the Poor can arrange for you to have a little house, a little wooden house built. So they are very charitable, and they are very strong in the belief that charity is one of the great marks of Christianity. So just in passing, I find that a little interesting that Jesus says to this church, which I believe the predominant Christian element at this time period was the Roman Catholic Church. Am I saying it was the true Church of God? I'm saying it was a part of what was called the Church of God, because it was a church that called itself by the name of Jesus. And remember what I said at the beginning, that the Christian church, as God acknowledges it, as God acknowledges the Christian church, it is made up of those who call upon the name of Jesus. But of course, as I was saying, there is the invisible church, which is made up of those who are born again. So you have the visible Christian church, which I believe was primarily the Roman Catholic Church. That was the great Christian church, the great visible Christian church at that time. So Jesus says to this church generally, I know your works, I know your charity, I know your service. You put in work. And again, I think you have to say that whatever you think about the Roman Catholic Church, they seem to be very visible when it comes to charitable works, and they serve the community. They try to have service organizations and so on. So some of it can be applied to the Catholic Church. I don't know about faith, but he says, I know your faith, I know your patience, and your works. Now, it's interesting again, because like with Ephesus, he says, and the last to be more than the first. What is he talking about? Because he talks about works 2 times. He says, I know your works. And then he comes back and he says, and I know thy works. I know thy works, and I know thy works. He mentions it twice. And he says, and I know thy works. And the last is more than the first. Let me look at what it says in another version. Let me see if this word works means is It says the same thing. I know your deeds. I know your deeds. So I'm kind of assuming that it's the same Greek word. Let me see the NIV. I know your deeds. And the second time, it says, I know that you are doing more than you did at first. So it seems like it's talking about the same thing. I know your works. I know the things you are doing. And what he's saying is that what you are doing now is even more than you were doing at the beginning. So it seems like this church is a church that is characterized by working for the Lord. And to put it in context, if you remember what Brother Joel was mentioning this morning, that when we are saved, a part of the new life is that we go to work for the Lord. It seems like this is not a problem you would have had with the church of Thyatira. It was a working church. All right, so Jesus begins as usual with commendation. All right, I can look at you and see that you have the work at heart. I can look at you and see that you have love among you. You serve me, and you have faith, and you are patient. But now we come to the other part of it now, the negative. He says, in spite of this, I have a few things against you, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. Now, I don't have any reasonable doubt in my mind, any reasonable question as to who this woman Jezebel represents. The woman Jezebel, in my very considered opinion, my strong opinion, this woman Jezebel represents the Roman Catholic institution. So you might say, if Roman Catholicism is the woman Jezebel, then how can the Thyatira church represent the Roman Catholic institution? And it's contradictory, and that is why I'm saying that's not how we need to look at it. We need to look at it and say that all the Christians of that period represent Thyatira, including Catholicism, including the genuine Christians, all who call themselves by the name of Christ. They make up Thyatira, those who lived in that time period. But within Thyatira, you have those who bear the name of Christ, but they are not really belonging to Christ. Now, among those are those who have embraced the system of Roman Catholicism. And they are the ones now that Jesus identifies as the woman Jezebel. So you ask the question, is the woman Jezebel in the Christian church? Well, of course she is, because it says she calls herself a prophetess. She claims to be a servant of God. And she's actually teaching God's servants. So she is a part of the Christian body. So if we don't have a proper understanding of how to view the church, this can be a bit confusing. But once we understand that the church is those who call upon the name of Christ, those who are called by the name of Christ, whereas inside that body you have some who call the name but they don't really belong, then it becomes easier to understand. So Jesus is addressing his message to the overall Christians of that time period. And then he says to these Christians, look, there is within your era, your time period, within this age of the Christian church, there is a woman called Jezebel. And of course, you know, Jezebel was that evil woman who in the time of Elijah, she set up her false prophets. She destroyed all the prophets of God. And she set up her false prophets to take over Israel. And she's the woman who married to the king of Israel, Ahab. And they committed some of the greatest apostasies that was ever seen among the people of God. And it was because of Jezebel. Now, this is an appropriate description of the Roman Catholic system and the abominations that she brought in. She brought in her false prophets. She brought in her false teaching, and Jesus specifically says she called herself a prophetess, and what it means is that this institution claims to be the voice of God, because that's what a prophet is. Calls herself a prophetess, but what does she do? She teaches you. Jesus says you have been allowing her to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication. Let's look at what that means. What does it mean when a Christian commits fornication? It means that he becomes united, affiliated with, connected with some other master other than Christ. Christian fornication means that, Christian adultery means that we are Christians and we belong exclusively to Christ. The church is referred to as the bride of Christ. But when the bride of Christ, when Christians who are a part of this bride begins to give their loyalty and their love to institutions that are different from Christ, this is called fornication. It happened in ancient Israel when she made friends with the other nations. And James says the same thing. He says, you adulterers and adulteresses, don't you know that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever will be the friend of the world is the enemy of God. Now, the Roman Catholic Church was very good at this, in teaching people, in setting the example of forming alliances with the world. You know that the Roman Catholic Church became the state religion in many countries. In other words, they became established by the government, so that even to be a citizen of the country, you had to become a Catholic. So they were deeply involved in this kind of fornication, religious adultery. Now let me pause just a moment and say something about this. It is extremely tempting for Christian groups to seek political power, and I will tell you why. When you begin to develop a following, when people begin to follow the Christian church, you know, for example, in our group here, we have this evening 74 people. This morning we had about 100. Suppose our group grows and we come to the place where we have 1,000 members. Suppose we come to the place where we have 20,000 members. With 20,000 members, we begin to develop a great deal of influence, and we have the power to do things to even change how the country operates. Because notice, if we have 20,000 Christians, we become a strong voting bloc. We are able to do things, to get things done. Now, suppose we as Christians, we would like to see, for example, everybody wearing blue shirts. Let's say something crazy. Everybody needs to wear a blue shirt. We have the power. We have the power to begin to petition the government. If one person talks to the government doesn't listen. If 20,000 people talk to the government, they will listen. If the church becomes bigger and we have 1 million people in a place like Jamaica, where Jamaica has a little over, has about 2.5 million people living here. If you have 50,000 or 500,000 people, like the Adventist Church has close to 500,000 people in Jamaica at the moment, it's a massive political influence in Jamaica. If you develop this kind of influence, you can make the government do things to support your kind of your religion. You can make the government do this. You can have the power to do this, and it's very tempting. If Christians are not balanced and careful, it's very tempting to begin to apply this power. And that is what churches do today. You have the religious lobby in America that is very influential in what the government is doing. Part of the reason why America is so supportive of Israel. I don't have any particular empathy either for the Jews or for the Palestinians. As far as religion is concerned, in my opinion, the Jews and the Palestinians are in a similar kind of darkness. The Jews are only of sentimental value because they used to be the people of God. But when I look at what goes on in the Middle East, I know that most of the Christians in America are obsessively, strongly behind the nation of Israel. And almost anything that she does to the Palestinians, they justify it. And I know that America spends millions of dollars in arming and protecting Israel, that the Palestinians have no chance if there is ever a war. And whenever a war breaks out, hundreds of Palestinians die, and Israel has a few tiny casualties. And the reason is these Christians in America and the Jews in America have great political power. They have the power the government knows that if it moves against the Christians and if it moves against the Jews, a massive amount of support is going to be lost. I just use this as an example because I want to point out that the church has the potential, the Christian church, any religious body for that matter, has the potential to exercise great power, and it's tempting to use this power. And it's not only tempting, but it has been the case right throughout history that when the church has developed to this place, it almost always uses that power to entwine itself into the political structure so that it becomes a part of the political system. And those of us who understand a little bit about what will happen in the future, we understand that this is why religion will be a part of the religious bodies will be a part of that system that brings persecution, because it has always been whenever religious bodies have obtained power. If you think about how Jesus died, the problem the Jews had was that they didn't have the authority to execute anybody. Sometimes they would stone somebody, like they stoned Stephen, and like they wanted to stone the woman taken in adultery. But when that happened, they were doing things illegally. Sometimes in Jamaica that happens, right? They catch a man. You have a lot of what you call predial larceny, right? They go and they steal people's cows and they steal people's goats, and it's a pain. Sometimes you have a little old lady, she's trying her best, and she has 2 or 3 little goats, and they come and they steal everything, or they kill or a little lady plants her potato patch, and she comes one morning and everything is gone. It's very disheartening. So in some rural communities, if they catch a thief, those country people are not to be played with, right? Everybody has a machete because that's what they do their farming with, machetes and hoes. So if they catch a thief, it's very dangerous for the thief. Sometimes they just chop them to pieces. And in such a case, it's illegal. It's against the law. But usually nothing happens because it's a whole community that acts. And you can't go and lock up the whole community. And besides, nobody can tell who actually gave the telling blow, who actually chopped at the right spot to kill the person. And then nobody will say who was involved anyway because there's no police there. So what I'm saying is that the Jews were like this. They would sometimes stone a person, but it was illegal. But when it came to officially condemning a person, they wanted Jesus to be officially condemned. And so they had to get him officially condemned. And so they came before Pilate, and Pilate says, I don't find any fault in him. But you hear what the Jews says? They said, if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Now, Pilate knew that this was a nation of people, and they had a lot of political influence. They could make him lose his job. They could send a report to Rome that could take him off his seat. And so they used their power, they used their political power to kill the Son of God. And I use this example because I want to say that this is how religious tyranny develops and how it works. And you see the same thing happening here in the Thyatira church. This woman Jezebel, this system, it was during this period, she taught people how to commit this spiritual fornication. She taught people that a part of the Christian experience is to unite yourself to worldly powers. The Roman Catholic Church teaches that as the Church of God, they have the right to rule over kings. They have the right to rule over political powers. That's a part of their philosophy of life. I understand true Christianity to say, our kingdom is not of this world. In this world, we don't seek political power. In this world, we don't become involved with the systems of this world. Our duty here is to preach the good news, to focus on it, and to teach people of the kingdom to come, not to interfere, not to be involved in how this world is run. Like our master, we walk the same kind of pathway. But Jezebel, this Roman Catholic system was teaching the servants of Christ to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. And what this means is, of course, things sacrificed to idols are practices, beliefs, ideas that are coming from paganism. So just to look at it, you can see very clearly the apostasy, the gradual deterioration of the Roman Catholic system explained here in this symbolic language. You can see here the history of how they gradually went downhill further and further until they actually became this great false system. One other thing I should say before we move on to the next verse, which is that just bear in mind that this same church that became this woman Jezebel, if you want to look at things from an organized point of view, it's the same church that was referred to, that we would refer to as the apostolic church. This is why, don't you ever identify the Church of God by a denominational structure. Don't identify it by an organized identity, by the organization. This is foolishness. This is a formula for great deception. And I will use our little fellowship here as an example to just show you why this is so terribly dangerous. Let us say the 75 of us who are in the room this evening. We're so pleased with ourselves. We're so happy about the things that we have learned and that we understand. We say, all the things that we believe, these seem to be the marks of the Church of God. You know what? We have the truth. Let's call ourselves the enlightened ones, for example. And let's establish ourselves as a church. Let's register so that we make sure nobody else can use our name and nobody else can take our identity. And to make sure that what we believe is maintained, we get a statement of beliefs and we set it down and we set up a constitution. We will always have 3 people who lead out, and these people must believe these things, and the church will be organized and run in this way. And we set out our ideas of what makes us so perfect, and we set it in stone. This is how every denomination begins. It begins with people misunderstanding the true nature of the Church of God, and people believing that what they have is the end of the story, and there's no more progress to be made. But if we do this, what have we done? What we have done is open the door for the greatest harm, and I'll tell you why. When we set up a system, the system must now, for it to survive, it must have administrators. That's the point. It must have administrators. A system cannot run itself. You need people to see to it that it keeps running. Even if there's a constitution and there's a set of beliefs, you still need people to kind of lead out and to see that it is run continuously. from this point, it's a very simple job for Satan, because now, whereas we had 75 people, 76 people that Satan had to get at, now he only has to get at 3 people. That's how it works. Now he only has 3 people that he has to reach. I want you to get the impact of what I'm saying. The Roman Catholic Church has got it that it only needs 1 person for Satan to reach. And he got to that person, which is a Pope. Look at the present Pope, for example. There are many Catholics who are not happy with this present Pope because he seems to be sympathetic towards the gay movement. And he makes changes. He's making changes that some of them are upset about. In fact, there are some Catholics who are referring to this present Pope as the Antichrist. And if you remember Pope John Paul II, a few years ago, he really made some big changes. One person has the power to make significant changes in your belief structure that should never be in the church of God at all. No one person should be able to take the movement of God and turn it and twist it. It should never happen. But what makes it possible is when you organize and you make yourself into an institution. Now I'm saying that the early Christian church, they made this mistake. I believe they made this mistake. And that same organization began to go through changes until it became the Roman Catholic institution. It was the same organization, but it was not the same church. Remember that. The church is made up of the people who, the true church, the invisible church, is made up of the people who truly belong to Christ, who have His Spirit in their hearts, and who obey Him only. That's the true church as God sees it. But you have the visible church, which is usually made up of the organization and institutions that Satan is able to manipulate and control. If you're a part of the Seventh-day Adventist group, if you're an independent Adventist, you will hear what I've been hearing for decades, and for all I know, it's true. They say that Jesuits have infiltrated the church. Right? They say that Jesuits are working in high places. If you listen to Walter White and others, they say that some of these men who are leading in the Adventist church are really Catholic Jesuits. Maybe. I don't even know if it makes a big difference, but it's quite possibly true. And if I were a Catholic, if I were the Pope, or I were the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, and I find that there are churches that are fighting against my church, and I had the ability and I didn't have any morals, why wouldn't I infiltrate your church? Why wouldn't I send my agents into your church to change it? Because your church has the structure to make it possible. Let me tell you, theoretically, you know what I would need to do if I wanted to infiltrate Adventism? I would get one of my sons. Okay, I have 2 sons, or I'll get a young man. My sons are bright enough. One of them who has 4 subjects in the GCE, General Certificate of Education. That's what it takes in Jamaica, right? Get a brilliant young man who is committed to Catholicism. Make sure that he has some education. Make him apply to the Adventist school to go there and be a pastor. He has the qualifications. They'll accept him readily. But of course, let him become a member of the Adventist church first. But first of all, you let him know what his true religion is. Then you let him go to one of the crusades and pretend to be converted. And then he goes to the college. And if he's brilliant, they're going to tell him, man, you should go into the ministry. So he goes into the ministry. And he is so obedient, and he conforms, and he works hard. So he goes to the top. He goes to the top. He makes his way up until he comes to the place where he has such strong influence. He can work to change the things that are taught and that are believed. It's what I would do if I were that kind of scoundrel in that kind of position. So it wouldn't be strange to me if you really have people like this. But what I'm saying is, what makes it possible? What makes it possible? What makes it possible is the fact of the kind of structure you have. In the Adventist system and in most churches, what it takes to become a minister is you have to have the academic qualifications and you have to go to the seminary. That's what it takes. I love where I am at the moment, and I'll tell you why. And I'm not boosting us, and I'm not boosting me, but I'm just giving you the practical reason why every time somebody says, you should have a statement of beliefs, or somebody says, why don't you be more organized? I learned this from A.T. Jones. But I've made it my philosophy. If somebody wants to come in and to bring false ideas into this group, they will have to overcome 76 people. It may be that I have a strong influence. It may be. All right? It may be that I have a strong influence. I will admit that. But I don't have an official position. I'm not the president or the prime minister. You can't vote. I can't vote that all of you believe something. All of us are people who are here because we have a mind and a conscience before God that we want to know the truth, and nobody pushes us into anything. You don't have to sign any statement of beliefs. You don't have to become a member of anything. We are here because we want to be here, because we think that according to what we see in the Word of God, what we are getting is helpful. And the day we don't see this, nobody has a closed door. You step away, you leave, there is freedom. Nobody can come and pervert this, because anybody who comes with a different idea, you have 76 people who are going to say, brother, let's hear your explanation. And 76 people will say, well, I don't believe this. That's not what I see in the Bible. And you can't get to the leader to change the leader, because there is no official leader, there's no church structure, there's no system that you can take over and use it to dominate and control the minds of other people. This is why in the final movement, God's people are going to be a people outside of the denominations. I am fully convinced, because denominationalism is what opens the door for this woman Jezebel to behave like this. It's what opened the door for the Apostolic Church to become the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic system. And I know I spent a lot of time on this, but I believe that that is exactly the way of it. So Jesus goes on to say to this woman Jezebel, and I gave her space to repent of her fornication, and she repented not. And of course, you would say she has gotten a lot of space, because the Catholic Church has been in this condition from about in the 5th century. We are now in 2021, and she has not repented. It's still in the same condition, still embracing the same ridiculous ideas. I mean, some of the things that are believed in Catholicism, I am astonished, because you know what is funny to me is that intelligent people believe some of these things. Catholics and Mormons. I mean, amazing. Let me just touch on Mormons since I'm only passing. But as I mentioned, Catholics, and you know, Mormons believe that God has a wife. Mormons believe that all of us were in heaven, and we were spirits, and then we agree. God sent us down to earth to be in these bodies, and we are to get married, and we are to have children, and when we die, if we are saved, we are going to go back into paradise, and we are going to have our wives with us. That's why they have several wives, because they believe the more wives you have, the more children you can have. And we are going to give birth to spirit children, and God is going to put each one of us in charge of a world, and we are going to make our own world. We are going to be like a God on that world, and we are going to have children to populate each world, each one of us. So they believe this, which is kind of crazy, because some of these people are some of the most educated people in America. And yet you have people who believe this. But when you think about Catholicism, all right, they believe that when you die, if you are very bad, you go straight to hell. If you are very good, you go straight to heaven. If you are kind of in between, you go to a place named purgatory. And God is going to roast you in purgatory for a long time, sometimes long, sometimes short, depending on if you never were good enough in your life, but you were kind of good, you go to purgatory. And in purgatory, what is going to happen? God is going to burn out the remaining bad. And it might take years, it might take a long time, till you are burned out enough that you are ready to fly into heaven. Intelligent people believe this. The most educated people in the world believe this kind of rubbish. And you ask yourself, how is this possible? They believe that Mary is in heaven, the mother of Jesus, and that if you really want special favors with Christ, you can talk to Mary, because a son always listens to his mother. They believe that when they have the communion and the priest says to the bread in Latin, "Es corpum meum," with those words, they change the bread into flesh, and they change the wine into blood. The Catholic Church teaches that the wine that you drink is literal blood. It's not symbolic or figurative. What I'm saying is the absolute truth. You can check it out for yourself. This is their teaching. That the thing that they drink in the communion is real blood. As a matter of fact, during the Middle Ages, to prove some of their cases, they used to tell stories about a piece of the communion bread falling to the ground, somebody sticking it with a knife and it started to bleed. Things like this. They made up fables to set the people, to cement the people in their idolatrous mumbo jumbo. But what I'm saying is that the basis for this kind of nonsense is the fact that people put their trust in the system. They have joined the system, and the system is God's church, and so the church cannot be wrong. And if the church says the sky is made of is purple, and you see this, or the church says the sky is red, and you see that it is blue, you must believe the church, because the church is infallible. Religious blindness is one of the greatest kinds of blindness that there is in the world. So the church had these hundreds of years to repent. Jesus says, "I gave her space to repent, and she repented not." This is interesting too, because most of the other church periods are kind of short, a couple hundred years, but this Thyatira period, it seems to have taken over 1,000 years, and the church never changed. So I think that you can see a hint of this where Jesus says, "I gave her space to repent." Now, in verse 22, "Behold, I will cast her into Behold, I will cast her into a bed, and them that commit adultery with her into great tribulation, except they repent of their deeds." What is this talking about? I think this is where Jesus mentions the end of time to Thyatira. Because who is he referring to when he says, "them that commit adultery"? He's referring to the political powers of the world. And where does he throw these powers, and where does he throw them along with this woman Jezebel? "I will throw her into great tribulation." What does that refer to in the book of Revelation? In the Revelation, the great tribulation is the last great time of trouble, just before Jesus comes again. So what Jesus is saying is that this Thyatira system, it will exist down to the coming of Jesus. And at that time, near the end of time, near the coming of Jesus, he's going to throw Thyatira into great tribulation. Not Thyatira, the woman Jezebel. This aspect of Thyatira is going to be thrown into great tribulation. And we see this in Revelation 18 when it says that the kings, the 10 kings, will hate the whore. It's interesting too, because Thyatira is said to be that woman Jezebel. Well, it doesn't call her a whore, but it says she teaches people to commit fornication. So that's basically whoredom. It says, "I gave her space to repent of her fornication." That is whoredom. She commits adultery. I will cast her into a bed, and them that commit adultery with her. So she is the great whore. She is the whore. And in Revelation it says that the 10 horns, they will eat her flesh and make her naked and burn her flesh with fire. So she goes into this great tribulation, and then also those who commit adultery with her will all experience the tribulation, because the kings of the earth, the nations of the world, will also be involved in that great tribulation of the 7 last plagues. So, as we look at the message point by point, it appears more and more that we are correct saying this refers to the Roman Catholic period. He goes on to say, "And I will kill her children with death." I suppose we can take that at face value. Those who are a part of this system, Jezebel, who remain with it, they are going to suffer her fate. Whatever she suffers, they will experience it. You can also look at this and tie it to the message of Revelation 18 when it says, "Come out of her, my people, that you partake not of her sins and that you receive not of her plagues." Because those who remain, they will experience this. I will kill her children with death. And all the churches will know that I am he which searcheth the reins and the hearts, and I will give unto every one of you according to your works. And what do we imply from this? I am he which searcheth the reins and the hearts. This word reins, I think literally it means the kidneys. But of course it doesn't mean literal kidneys, just like hearts does not mean literal hearts. There are the places in your body where sometimes you feel certain kinds of sensations. It says in the alternate translation, I am he which searches the minds and the hearts. And I go with that because it refers to the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions and the intentions. Right? I would say the body, the spirit and the soul. The spirit and the soul. I would refer to it that way. I am the one which searches the reins and the heart. So what is Jesus saying? He's saying, I am the person who understands the motives. I understand what is in the heart. I am the person who is not deceived by your works of charity or whatever else you present. I know, I can see and understand what goes on inside. And what I will do, what you can be sure is that you will receive. I will give you according to your works. In other words, when you come to the end, when people receive according to what they have planted, there will be no mistakes made. There will be no attention to the public demonstration. What will happen is that you will receive according to what is in your heart and in your mind. But then he goes on and he repeats what he says at the beginning, or he goes back to his original point. But unto you I say, and unto the rest in Thyatira, as many as have not this doctrine, and which have not known the depths of Satan as they speak, I will put upon you none other burden, but that which you have already. Hold fast till I come. So it goes back to what we said at the beginning. Remember, there are 4 churches to which Jesus mentions his coming. And they are the last 4. Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. So we can conclude that even though these churches refer to different periods of time, when the next church comes along, it does not mean that the former church, the spirit of that former church, it doesn't mean that it disappears. You have overlapping. So Thyatira is there at the coming of Jesus. Philadelphia is there. Laodicea is there. So it's 4 different aspects of the Christian church. You have the Thyatira period, the Thyatira aspect here. Now Jesus says, he says something interesting when you consider the Thyatira age. I'm not going to put upon you any other burden but what you have already. Hold fast till I come. So there were Christians who were living in the time of the great Roman Catholic apostasy. Some of those Christians we might refer to as we have heard of the Waldenses, the Albigenses, those kinds of people. You have those Christians who were living in the wilderness, and their understanding of truth was nowhere near as comprehensive as we might understand today. But they were faithful to the Lord. As they could understand him, they were faithful. And they certainly, by God's grace, they did not embrace the depths of Satan that was embraced by that woman Jezebel. And Jesus is saying, to you who have not known these depths of Satan, you have not gone as deep into apostasy as this woman Jezebel, I'm going to put no other burden upon you. What does he mean by this? Well, I'll tell you what I can understand by this. Does Jesus put a burden upon you and me? I don't call it a burden. But I believe that he places upon us a greater responsibility than the people who lived in that time. And when I say a greater responsibility, I don't count it as a burden, but I know I have a greater responsibility. And what is my responsibility? I understand God better than those Christians did. And so I have a responsibility. I call it a privilege. I have a privilege of representing God differently and better than they did. This, if you wish, is the burden that is put upon me. This is my burden. This is my mission. This is my ministry. God never put it upon those brethren. He never required it of them because they were never exposed to this kind of light. And he says, I'm going to put upon you no other burden. Remain in the light that you have. I'm not going to force you. It's like a brother wrote me recently. And he was talking about the message that we have been sharing. And he says, I first began to understand some of what you are sharing by listening to a minister, an old minister. And he named the person. Maybe I shouldn't name him. We might know this person. But anyway, he named the person. But he says, but one problem with this other minister, he can't go as deep as we go because he's still a Trinitarian. And I could see immediately if you're a Trinitarian, you can't understand some of the things that we understand. And he says, but he's 90, he's in his 90s now. He's an old man and he's tired. And he says, I don't have the heart to disturb him at this time of his life. He has served the Lord and he did the best he could. I know he's an old man and he's tired and his mind is not as clear as it used to be. He says, I don't know if I need to go and disturb him with a new doctrine that he might have a problem understanding, he might have a problem accepting, so, I just leave him alone. And I don't know how you think about that and how you look at it, but as far as I'm concerned, I think this is what God is saying. God is saying, I understand your limitations. I understand you never quite went as far in experiencing the light. And it's okay. It's okay. You don't need to know everything in order to be saved. You don't need to have all your doctrines perfectly right. You don't need this. What saves us, brothers and sisters, what I love about what I understand is that we are saved by faith. We are saved by faith. God saves us in a way that everybody is qualified, regardless of whether you understand as much as a 10-year-old child, regardless of whether you understand as much as the greatest theologian, regardless of whether your behavior is way up there or whether it is just at the basic beginning. Regardless of this, you are savable because you have faith. Jesus takes you where you are, and if it's the appropriate time and there is a capacity, he takes you higher, because the higher you go, the happier you can be and the greater you can represent him in this world. But some of us, he says, I'm not going to put upon you any other burden. Just hold fast what you have. Just hang on to what you have. And I really love this about our God. I really love this about our God. He takes us where we are. If you're a child, he will come to you as a child. If you are an imbecile, come to you on that level. And he will take you where you are, and he will do the best that he can do with you there and accept you. One of the things I like, I mentioned before, you remember Naaman? Naaman came to Elisha to be healed of his leprosy. Elisha told him, go dip in the Jordan 7 times. He didn't want to go at first, but his servant persuaded him. He went and he dipped 7 times. He came back healed. And he said to Elisha, here is gold and garments and silver and so on. And Elisha said, no, keep your reward, and sent him away. And then he said something to Elisha, and look at what he said. He says, I'm going to ask you one thing. And if it were me, I would say, this is not Elisha's question. Elisha can't answer him. He has to go to God with this question, but he comes to Elisha because that is where his understanding is, right? And he says, look here, when I go back to Syria, my master will go into the house of Rimmon. Rimmon was their idol. And when my master goes into the house of Rimmon, I have to go with him. because he holds on to my hand. And when he bows in the house of Rimmon, I have to bow as well. Please forgive me for this. You know what Elisha said? Elisha said, go in peace. You mean that? The man is asking permission to go and bow to an idol. He's asking permission to go and bow to an idol. And the servant of God says, go in peace. You mean to say God would accept this? I tell you, sometimes I think we don't understand God. But God takes us where we are. God understood. What should Elisha have done? He should have said, Naaman, stay here for 2 weeks. Let me give you an evangelistic series. Let me take you through a series of Bible studies and teach you what it means to serve the living God. No. God took him where he was, and God took him at the point where he was, because he had learned faith in God. And that was a massive step for this man who was born in idolatry. He had learned faith in God. As a matter of fact, he says, look here, give me a mule full of dirt. Pack up my mule with dirt. Because when I go back home, I'm not going to offer any sacrifice except to Jehovah. And apparently a part of the system was that you had to offer the sacrifice on the dirt from that land. So he carried some Israelite dirt back to Syria, and that's where he offered sacrifice to Jehovah. He had learned faith in the living God, but his concept was so limited and so dark and so childish. And God says, Naaman, I'm going to put upon you no other burden. God said it through Elisha. Go, even bow in the house of Rimmon. But you have come far enough that I can save you, and I will take you there.
I have a little point.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So I I am listening to that point that you made. That's a very good illustration, by the way, very good example to bring your point out about the levels of understanding. Because when you take the three Hebrew boys who were placed in a similar situation, you see more was required of them. Because if they had just bow and not believing, but if they had bow, then they would have basically have let down God. So they were
Um,
in a totally different situation because they had more responsibility. They knew more. They understood more about the true God than Naaman did.
and Jesus said the same thing. He says, to whom much is given, of him much is required. All right, and I mean it's natural. It doesn't even need an explanation, because look here. If I know the will of God and I choose not to do it, I am in rebellion against God. How do I love him? How am I his servant? How do I have faith if I'm doing this? But if I am a person in darkness and I don't know enough about the will of God, and I live by what I know, my heart is right, and the heart is what God is dealing with.
Brother
We
David.
Yes, Brother Sam, go ahead.
Let's
Uh,
continue on with this, please. Then we could ask questions later. This is too interesting, man.
Go ahead, Brother Sam. Let him go ahead, Brother Ray.
permission, and I got permission, right, Brother David? All
You have
I want to say is that you made God so lovely. You make him a lovely being. I like that. I just love that when I listen to you. You make God, you understand God because he is love. No doubt about it. And the way you bring things out, how God handled a different situation, shows, Brother David, that you really is in tune with the love of God. Hallelujah.
thank th- thank you, Brother Sam, and I'm glad you got it correct, which is that the only thing that we can do is learn the truth about God and highlight it. It's wonderful to know that this is what He's like. It's wonderful to know, and all of us praise Him for helping us to see that this is the way He is. This is the way He is, and these gems, they come out in places. Sometimes you have the volume of information that seem to give a different impression, and you try to understand why is it like this, and then you begin to get an insight, and you see this is how he really is, and it makes sense. It makes sense. The more I understand God, the more I see that nature itself and life itself teaches me. Why would I condemn a crippled child? Why would I condemn a crippled child? He can't walk, okay? He has one leg that he can walk with, and I condemn him because he cannot run with the rest of the children on the playground. I'm the PE teacher, and I'm punishing this child because he cannot run, and he's crippled. Why would I do this? Unless I'm out of my head. And yet this is what people sometimes do with God, right? They say that if you don't come up to the mark, God does not consider your limitations and your inequalities. He makes the demand of you anyway. And if you don't make it, it's just too bad. But it's kind of the picture of God that religion has given to us over time. And it's beautiful when we really come to know the truth and to see the truth about the God that we really worship. So he goes on in verse 26. He says, he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations. Now, I believe that this is true of every Christian. Why does he mention it to Thyatira? And I'll tell you why I think so. I think he's talking to the Christians of that age. And let me tell you, if any Christian ever suffered at the hands of the nations, it was the Christians during that period. You know what I'm saying? This was the Dark Ages, and nobody suffered under the hands of the woman Jezebel and the nations like those Christians did. You know, they were burned alive. They were slaughtered like chickens. They were hunted like wild beasts by the political powers of Europe and the false church, the woman Jezebel. And Jesus says to them, look here, the one who overcomes and remains faithful to the end, I'm going to give him power over the nations. You have been on the receiving end, you will be at the place where you stand with the shoe on the other foot. Now he goes on to quote in verse 27. He quotes from Psalm, I think it's Psalm 2, but it's also quoting from Revelation 19, where we see Jesus coming and he is going to rule the nations with a rod of iron. And it explains here what that means. It says, he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father. So Jesus is here saying to the people who are faithful from Thyatira that they will have the privilege through him and with him, because we're a part of the body of Christ. When Christ destroys the nations, in a sense, we, his people, are destroying the nations. And I'll explain that to you just in case you need the explanation again. When Christ overcame sin, we overcame sin. When we experience the victory over sin, it is Christ experiencing it through us, because we and he are one. We are the same life. So whatever he experiences, we experience, and vice versa, as long as we are walking with him in faith, as long as his life is our life. So when Christ conquers the nations and breaks them with a rod of iron, his victory is our victory. His defeat of the nations is our defeat. It is our defeat of them. His destruction of the systems of this world is our victory over them. So we are a part of that whole process because Christ is us. We sit in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. So he makes this promise.
Amen.
Amen. This promise that is made to himself, he applies to those who overcome from Thyatira, even as I received of my Father. And I will give him the morning star. And that is interesting too, because Jesus, I think, says, where does he say it? I think in one of these churches he says, I am the morning star. I don't see where it is, but I think he says it to one of the churches. But anyway, he says, I will give him the morning star. And that would refer to them experiencing him in a special way. And of course, he ends the message with what he says to all the churches. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. I won't comment on that again this week because we have done that at the end of every church message right through the previous 3 weeks. Now, I think I finished just in time because it's beginning to come down here. The rain is beginning to come down, and I can't compete with it. So, I think I finished just in time. I'm going to close off at this point, and I'm going to say if we have any point that we want to discuss, then we can do that. But I have to stop because I can hardly hear myself now because of the rain. So thank you, brothers and sisters, for your fellowship this evening. I appreciate you joining with me. I appreciate Kev sitting there, driving away, but man, it's good that you're able to join us. We appreciate it.